Welcome, everybody. And no, this is not Corey's sultry, velvety voice to start off your podcast this evening. This is Brent here at Cheap Pops Wrestling Podcast. But unfortunately, I do not have Corey with me tonight. Corey is hard at work on some professional-related stuff. So I am running solo tonight, but we have a treat for you. We have our first ever Cheap Pops Wrestling Podcast guest on the way here shortly, and that is our wonderful partner in the podcasting world, Anthony, from the Behind the Autograph podcast, sponsored by the Autograph Cave, his little Facebook group that he has started and helping out the autograph and podcast world. So our partner, Anthony, from Behind the Autograph podcast, in partnership with the Autograph Cave on Facebook and on YouTube, he will be joining us here shortly, and he's got some really cool stories for us in relation to his experience, not only growing up as a fan of wrestling, but some other cool wrestling related tidbits and stories that he has in store for you guys. I don't want to give any spoilers, but it's pretty cool, and it'll be pretty interesting to hear from him and just also have our first guest on the show. I love talking with Corey, and I love being able to do this with him, but sometimes it's nice to hear another voice in the mix. So looking forward to having him on here the back half of the show and letting him talk to you guys about some of his thoughts and opinions around wrestling, as well as some stories. So we're going to jump right into it. First and foremost, thank you again for checking us out here at Cheap Pops Wrestling Podcast, and hopefully you are still checking us out on all our various social media platforms. We have a Twitter account and an Instagram account, both at the same handle at Cheap Pops WP. You can send us an email at cheappopswrestlingpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook by searching Cheap Pops Wrestling Podcast. Please don't forget to like that page, and check us out on YouTube at Cheap Pops Wrestling Podcast. Don't forget to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and hit the bell so you're notified when we are on and posted. I'm going to talk really briefly before we get to Anthony about something that I had a really cool experience to do, because I want to save some of the other stuff that I was going to talk about tonight until we get to have our wonderful co-host Corey back. So I want to talk about something that was really cool that I got to do this past weekend, which was I got to go see an NXT live event. I know we talked about it briefly on our last episode, and so I want to kind of run through that for you really quickly, because not only was it a really cool card, but also had a really, really cool experience afterwards. So NXT was in Seattle this past weekend, and I'm near the Seattle area. So I took my son to it. Corey was unable to attend with me, so I took my 7-year-old son. It was his first ever live wrestling event. He's watched it on TV with me now since he was about 4 years old, has been begging me to take him, and I decided to finally take him. And we had a really good time. It was a really solid card. There were some surprises as well, which was really cool. So I'm going to get right into the card. I want to kind of break that down for you, let you know some general thoughts and feelings, and then kind of hit you with what I think the really big story is. So first match of the night on the NXT Seattle show was Breezango versus the Outliers. I had never really seen the Outliers before. They're kind of your typical roughneck tag team. They have a manager whose name is slipping me right now, but he wears like really high slacks and no socks and studded shoes and glasses. The crowd was really hot for him in terms of like razzing on him. At one point there was a "Where's your socks" chant, which I thought was really cool. They had the typical kind of finish where he was kicked out for interfering too much, and then Breezango ended up getting the win on that one. But it was cool to see Breezango. They're a hilarious team. Fine way to kick off a live event, being able to have two guys that are kind of more well-known out there. It was totally fine. Then the second match was really cool for us local fans because it featured a wrestler who is billed from Tacoma. I know he didn't live here his entire life, but Isaiah Swerve Scott, who spent a chunk of time on McCord Air Force Base, which is here in Washington, he was the second match against Dominik Dijakovic. I am becoming increasingly a bigger and bigger fan of Dijakovic. I love his look. I love his demeanor in the ring. I think he could be a really big star down the line. He's certainly a type of guy that Vince McMahon loves, big and strong and kind of intimidating looking. But they put on a really, really good show. I can't remember exactly how it happened, but Dominic ended up bleeding a little bit, which I think was kind of a surprise to some of them. There was a little bit of some fumbling around as they kind of figured out kind of what to do about that. But that was really cool to see him there and see Swerve, because he got a huge ovation when he came out. So that was a really solid match. And then the third match was kind of intriguing because it was one that I actually wasn't expecting to see in terms of one of the participants. But Candice LeRae and Tegan Knox teamed up against Aaliyah and Vanessa Bourne. And I know Tegan Knox just literally returned last week on NXT television from her injury. So, I mean, I'm sure she's been kind of working and training and getting ready, but being someone that I had just seen her on television, literally 2 days prior, and then saw her already like traveling again and on the road and in a tag match, I thought was really, really cool. So I definitely liked that. Her and Candice LeRae picked up the win on that one. I did forget to mention Dijakovic won the match against Swerve, which I was a little surprised about, but I guess you're trying to build him to be a little bit stronger. So I do appreciate they're trying to kind of keep up with the storylines. You're not going to have Dijakovic losing matches on a live event and then going to fight for the North American title, this week. So I do get it. I just think people were hoping that Swerve was going to win kind of in his hometown. But LeRae and Knox won that women's tag team match. Then we had an interesting match. Cassius Ohno actually appeared, which I was kind of surprised about, because he's an NXT UK guy now, kind of technically. He did speak to that. He ended up facing Bronson Reed, who is an up and comer. He was very heavily promoted on the NXT Twitter feed this weekend, where they were kind of doing their like Northwest tour between like Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. And I was intrigued to see him live and in person. And he's got a good like persona to him. He seems kind of like hard hitting, but he's like not dastardly. So like he has that face feel. He seems to kind of be a guy that people want to like rally around. For a bigger guy, he's got a quality move set. So I was impressed by him, but Ono picked up the win on that one and then kind of started cutting a promo on how like he went to NXT UK because nobody in the back's any competition. And he kind of kept repeating that over and over again. And so in my head, I was kind of going like, okay, where's this going? And then out came Matt Riddle to a really huge ovation. They kind of scrapped and scuffled and all that. Riddle was able to get some moves in on him and kind of have Cassius Ohno retreat a little bit, which got a big pop from the crowd. And then Riddle grabbed the mic and said how Seattle was kind of his like home away from home, how he loves being here. And he's like, I'm not leaving until I get a fist bump from every one of you bros. And then literally hopped the barricade. So the setup was we were at like a local theater, which was interesting. So there was only a few rows of seats on the stage, and then the stage had the ring, and then there was like the orchestra pit, and then the rest of us, kind of almost like you're watching like a concert or a play. And so he jumped down to the orchestra pit, hopped the barricade, and literally started walking through the stands, giving fist bumps to everybody. So that was kind of a cool moment. I think they're trying to do it to maybe kill a little bit of time too. I think they're trying to transition to some different things. So he was able to kill like a solid 5 to 10 minutes with that, but it was really cool. It got the crowd hyped up, and got us kind of all excited to see, a bigger name, like literally in and amongst us. So that was really cool. Then the next match was kind of my favorite match of the night, and it was Pete Dunne versus Damian Priest. I know they just recently had that on NXT television, but man, did they deliver, even on a live show. Pete Dunne just impresses the crap out of me. I like Damian Priest too. I don't mind him. Like, he's good, he's solid, but there's just something about Dunne that really, really impresses me. He worked over the fingers, he just kept working over Aleister Black's fingers. And I thought that was really, really cool, to see him do and like make a focal point be something that's that small and minute and make it seem like it is something a lot larger than it really is. They had a couple of cool spots too, even battled outside the ring, which is a really tricky thing to do, when you're on a stage, because if you were to exit the ring and like face the audience, there's only about 3 or 4 feet of clearance between you and falling into the orchestra pit. And so it makes it a little dangerous to be out there. But they went out there. They even kind of did a spot where like Pete and him were like punching each other back and forth, and they kind of looked like they might, fall into the orchestra pit. So that added a little bit of an element of danger that you might not normally see at a live event. So I was pleased with that. I thought the match was killer. I was all about it. So that was really, really strong. And then we had a women's championship match, which was really cool. And that was Dakota Kai, versus Shayna Baszler. Baszler delivers as a heel. She is so good at that persona. Dakota Kai is kind of like the perfect antithesis to that, just being kind of like happy and bubbly. I don't want to like call her another Bayley, because she's not at that level in terms of like the like gimmick of like being a fangirl and all that, but just like that kind of like happier, like we can rally around you persona. They're really, really good kind of yin and yang for that in terms of a matchup. They definitely, Baszler worked over Dakota Kai's leg. Dakota sold that, prior injury really, really well. Obviously, Shayna Baszler was able to win that match, after what looked to be a really devastating submission move. Like it looked like she was really choking her out at one point, which again, is the key to a great submission move. So it was a solid match. I was definitely digging it. I've obviously heard a lot about people like Dakota Kai and Tegan Nox, but just because they've been out of action for so long, I didn't get to see much of them. But now that I've seen them on TV and seen them both live, I'm impressed. I think, I've seen them and like Candice LeRae do some fun things on Twitter together and stuff. Like you could definitely create a little women's stable with some of these girls. And so I was impressed. It would have been cool to see a twist of having like a championship change hands at a live event. But again, I understand why they don't do it. You don't want to have to like deal with that later on television. So 100% fine. But it was just cool to see a championship match. That doesn't necessarily happen all that often on a live event. So I was pleased with that. And then our main event of the evening was a part of the send-off for a team that I know Corey and I have been increasingly becoming bigger and bigger fans of, and that is the Street Profits. Angelo Dawkins, Montez Ford. Montez Ford, now my kind of sarcastic friend who I was able to run into in Las Vegas. But they took on the Undisputed Era, and it was in a 6-man tag match. And so Undisputed Era comes out. No Adam Cole there. He was not there, unfortunately. So Roderick Strong, Bobby Fish, and Kyle O'Reilly were. And then Street Profits came out, obviously, on their own and talked about how they needed to find a partner, and they just found the perfect partner. And then Finn Balor's music hits, and oh my God, the place went berserk. I don't think anyone saw that coming. I was more expecting it to be like Matt Riddle. So like when Riddle came out earlier, I was like, man, where are they going with this? Like, that's what I figured would be the Street Profits tag team partner, So when Finn Balor came out, it was just pandemonium. My son is a massive Finn Balor fan, even actually had his mask on, which will lead into a story I'm going to tell here in a minute. But my son was just absolutely over the moon. It was really, really cool to see Finn work that match. And then Angelo Dawkins and Montez Ford cut a really, really heartfelt promo at the end of it, where they just thanked the NXT universe, thanked everyone about their time in NXT. I had no idea Angelo Dawkins, I think, had been with the company, for almost 7 or 8 years now, before making the jump up to Monday Night Raw. Finn even mentioned before he left the ring and let them say their piece that Angelo Dawkins had been with WWE before it was even NXT. So I'm thinking back to like FCW days or something like that. So that man has put in his time. And so kudos to him for like finally getting a shot at kind of like the big leagues, to use an old school Chris Jericho phrase. But it was a really well done match. There were some funny spots, there were some big spots, there were some really fast paced spots. You got 6 guys in that ring who can all go. So there was some humor. There was a couple of fun spots with like Angelo. There was one point where like Roderick Strong ran towards him, and Angelo like picked him up and spun him around, and he kind of fell to the ring dizzy. And then like he did the same to Kyle O'Reilly and did the same to Bobby Fish. And then like Angelo or Montez ran towards him to do it, to like celebrate. And Angelo just like instinctively picked him up and spun him around. And then like he like dropped Montez, and Montez landed on his feet and then like squared up like he was going to punch Angelo because like he was so out of it. So some good laughs, but also some really good wrestling moments as well. And then, obviously, you had Balor and the Street Profits, pick up the win on that one. So it was a really, really fun card to see. I had a blast being there. And then afterwards, we had an absolutely awesome moment. For some of you that might not know this, afterwards, quite often, you can kind of find some of the wrestlers heading to the bus out back and maybe snag some autographs, snag some pictures. So my son wanted to do that because he does know that I'm an autograph collector. And so we went out there, and we were getting lucky. We were getting some autographs. We got one from Bronson Reed. We got one from Swerve Scott. Candice LeRae came out and signed. Dakota Kai was out there doing some signing too. And I feel bad because I was frantically trying to find her picture in the program that we had, but I couldn't. And so obviously she had to go, and I wasn't able to snag her, but she was sweet enough to come out too, and sign some autographs and take some photos with fans. Matt Riddle came out and signed and took some photos, and so did Angelo Dawkins. So we got all of those. And then right towards the end, we see Finn Balor come out. And a couple fans, there's probably about 30 or 40 of us around there, maybe 50 or so. People were like, "Oh, hey, Finn, great job. So cool to see you here, Finn. That's great." And he's kind of waving to us as he's walking towards the bus, and he throws a suitcase in the bus and stops and then starts walking towards the group of us. And everyone at that point starts freaking out because, he's coming over, and we know he's probably going to sign or take some photos, hopefully. And so I look at my son who's on my shoulders, and I look up at him, and I grab his Finn Balor mask, and I go, "Buddy, put the mask on." And he's like, "Dad, why?" And I go, just put the mask on. Like, get your mask on. Like, trust me, Finn needs to see this. And whoever this guy is, God bless him, thank him. There was another kind of adult there, like maybe another dad or something, who saw my son put the mask on, and he goes, "Oh, cool, man, come on up by me." And he tries to help us get a little bit closer. And then as Finn's like walking around taking photos and pictures, he goes to that guy, and he's taking like a photo with that guy and getting an autograph. And that dad looks at Finn and goes, "Hey, Finn, look at the kid above me. He's got your mask on." And Finn looks at me, looks up at my son, and sees that my son has the Finn Balor mask on. And Finn just grins from ear to ear, and he's like, "Oh man," he's like, "I got to get a picture with this kid." And so that same dad like helps hoist my son off my shoulders and puts him over the guardrail to Finn. And instead of, I just thought, they were just going to kind of stand there and take a photo, Finn actually picks my son up and holds him and is like, "All right, let's get some photos." And so I snapped some photos of my son with the mask on, and then Finn's even like, "Well, let's get that mask off you so we can all see your face." And we, he takes some photos again with my son, without the mask on. And then I have a picture for Finn of him as the Demon during one of his NXT runs, and I go, "Would you mind signing this for us?" And he's like, "Oh no, of course. That was so cool to see your son with the mask on and everything." So we were very, very fortunate to get the chance to kind of rub elbows with many NXT superstars, but obviously kind of the most exhilarating getting to do that with Finn Balor and having him hold my kid. That was freaking such a cool moment as a dad, as a fan. And just, it's definitely a moment I know my son won't forget. And it's also a moment that I know I won't soon forget. So I had to let you guys know about that event and that night before we got to having Anthony on here, because it was just, excuse me, it was just too cool to not make sure I shared with all of you guys. So thanks for kind of listening to that ramble and that fast-paced rant, but I wanted to kind of give you some insight as to what the NXT show is like. If you go to our Instagram, you'll see some photos and videos from that night. Same with our Twitter feed. And that's got plenty of content on there that kind of helped summarize that night. My gosh, I'm so sorry. So with that said, and without further ado, we have our buddy Anthony here. I want to make sure we kick it over to Anthony and our wonderful interview with him so we can get to hear from another voice besides my own. All right, we are here with our good friend Anthony from Behind the Autograph podcast from the Autograph Cave. How you doing, bud?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, man. It's good to finally get you on our end of the show. You've been so gracious enough to get us, on or get me onto your podcast. It's nice to finally have you on ours.
Yes, I'm very excited to do this, and I'm glad that we could set it up tonight then.
Yeah, so let's make sure, because again, we have this great partnership that we've been working with. So let me pause and let you kind of take over here for a minute, because I'd love for you to let our fans in on what you do on your podcast and what you do on your Facebook page and all that. So go ahead and give us the rundown of what you do with the podcast and the Facebook.
All right. Well, you can find us on the Behind the Autograph podcast. It's basically just the behind-the-scenes stories of people graphing around America and even beyond America. Sometimes there's been a lot of people I've actually talked to that are not in America, like the United Kingdom and stuff, and they're graphing, and I've met some cool people through it, and I like to have guests on and talk about the little nuances of autographing. And then we have the Facebook group, which is the Autograph Cave, and you can find that, and there's all kinds of resources and stuff available to you. And it's we also have a website, theautographcave.net. It's kind of under construction, but it's worth checking out anyway. And that's pretty much what we do over at the Autograph Cave.
Nice, good. Well, yeah, I'm obviously a big fan of the site and the podcast, and I try to stay as active as I can on the Facebook page as well. I know, talking about the NXT Seattle event that I was recently at, I posted some of my autograph successes there. So I just, you've been you were an inspiration for us to kind of get back into the podcast world after our hiatus. So we're definitely appreciative that you've been willing to partner with us through this wonderful little podcast journey.
Yeah, it's been pretty fun, man. I'm very excited that you guys started back up, and I've gotten to do a couple podcasts, and it's just been fun, man. I'm glad that the Autograph Cave can kind of branch off into other things and still, help everybody in the autograph community, because that's what it's all about. That's
right. So I've been excited to talk to you and have you onto our show. I know we've dipped into wrestling a little bit when I've been a guest on yours, but you have a pretty interesting story regarding wrestling that I didn't actually know about until after we had our last little interview. So you were kind enough again to have me on as your first ever recurring guest. And afterwards, we continued our little kind of own conversation. You told me a really interesting story that I don't want to reveal just yet because I want you to tell it, about kind of your wrestling journey, so to speak, as a little bit more than a fan. So why don't you let our listeners in on what your background is, maybe not only as a fan, but just in the wrestling world.
Well, I mean, we can just start from the beginning. I guess that's a good place to start. I mean, I was a wrestling fan from the time I was like 6 years old, like just watching everything wrestling, everything you could imagine. And then when I got to be about 7 or 8, I found out that my cousin was an independent wrestler, and he worked like the local shows and whatever, and I really got into it there, and I was like, all right, I got to figure out like how this works. Like, he's got to teach me how this works and show me the different moves and so forth. So as a kid, like growing up from about 8 years old on, like he was just showing me all the little like nuances of like how they do things and stuff like that. And then it kind of grew into, all right, let's try and do this whole professional wrestling journey. So then I kind of branched off into that, and it got a little crazy, man. It got a little crazy.
it's really cool to hear that, you were able to kind of start, I guess, that young, having a relative that was in the independent scene. Had got to kind of be a cool experience to be that young, yet kind of already have, I don't want to say that education, but, like already be learning some of the tricks of the trade, so to speak, about that world that you were just kind of a fan of, and then all of a sudden kind of getting a taste of the reality of what that's like.
Yeah, it was really cool, and I'm like, every time I saw him, like I would see him maybe like once a month or whatever, and every time I saw him, it was okay. What else can you teach me? Like what else is going on? Like how can I become better from the last? And we would have like these mock matches or whatever. He would let me like beat him up and whatever, and like that's just how it kind of evolved. And then one day he came to me and he was just like, hey man, like I found this little local promotion and they have a little tiny wrestling school, and why don't you come down and bump around a little bit in the ring and see what happens, and I was like, well, yeah, like I'm gonna definitely do that.
Right. How old were you at the time when that happened?
Oh boy, probably like 20.
Wow. Okay. So still young. I mean, still, that's an early start to like, the wrestling career, like in jumping into that.
Yeah, it was, I think I was about 20. That seems about right.
Okay.
But, yeah, he just kind of one day, he was like, hey, actually how it really started was he was kind of like, hey, they need a referee, and like, you could probably be a referee because you're not that big, so you're probably not going to be a wrestler, but like, you could probably be a referee, So I was like, all right, whatever, that's fine. I can do the ref thing. That's kind of how it started. So I went down there, and it's just it was literally a ring, like in a field.
Really? It wasn't even inside, huh? It was just like out in the middle of nowhere?
Out in the middle of nowhere, man. It was a ring in a cornfield, I swear to God.
That is great. It's like Field of Dreams, the wrestling version. That is amazing.
Right. It was crazy. But these guys that had this ring, they had a legitimate wrestling company that still runs. It's a local promotion. They call themselves Apex Wrestling, I do believe. They've changed their names and changed owners so many times that the guys that were training me aren't even the guys that run it anymore. But it was just a local promotion. They just had a ring just set up in this field, and that's just how it started, man.
Wow. That is awesome. So I mean, what was it like kind of going through those rigors? Like, I mean, like, did you just kind of jump right into training? Were they still kind of looking at you as like, doing the ref thing? Like, what was that kind of initial, like, few weeks like, in terms of like finding your footing as to kind of where you fit in that whole scenario?
Well, like I said, I came in as a ref, so like the first time I was there, they were like, okay, like, let's have like a mock match or whatever, and you ref it, and like see if you screw anything up, So I refed it. It was fine, no big deal. And then all of a sudden, at the end of that practice, the owner guy, he gets in the ring and he goes, okay, we taught you, like, because basically how they opened practice was I sat down in the middle of the ring and like threw myself back just like that little bit so that I could kind of get acclimated to like protecting my head and knowing like what a bump kind of was type thing.
Yeah.
So it was like baby steps, like, and then they like stood me up and they're like, okay, now bump from your, from standing up, so, and then it was like, okay, you didn't give yourself a concussion, you probably are okay, Like,
I love that's the protocol. Like, that's like, all right, you didn't concuss yourself. Good job. Like, that's great.
Yeah, I know. Like, well, the thing that people don't understand is like the ring is hard.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't tuck your head, like, that's concussion city, man.
Right.
Like, that's what people might think it's a little softer than what it is, but let me tell you, it does not feel good.
Yeah.
The very first full bump that I took, I knocked the wind out of myself, and that was fun time. So, yeah, but so yeah, at the end of that practice, after I had refereed that match or whatever, the owner gets in and he goes, "Hey man, go ahead and take a bump again." I was like, "Okay." So I did, and he goes, "Okay, now this time I'm going to come off the ropes. I'm going to clothesline you." And I said, "All right, fine." And so he comes off the ropes. He's a big dude, right? Way bigger than me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not bumping until he hits me, right? Because if I like pre-bump before he even hits me, then like that looks horrible. So I'm going to make sure that he actually hits me before I bump.
Right.
So he hits me. I don't know if he did it on purpose or like if he accidentally misplaced where he was going, but he hits me right under the jaw, right? And my teeth like clang together, and I hit the mat, and my lip is bleeding, and I sold that shit like he killed me, right? And he kind of did.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Dolph Ziggler school of selling. I love it. Everything's your dad. Every single thing. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of did. I mean, he really hit me, you know. I was like, okay, like, that kind of hurt, but that was okay. Like, I feel like it was a good bump, you know, like, that's all right. And so I figured, you know, like you said, like, if I sell everything like they kill me, then I'll be all right, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of how I started to sell things. I started to, like every move they did to me, because at the next practice then they were just kind of, okay, take a bump for this move, take a bump for that one, whatever. And like everything I sold, they were like, wow, it looks like we're killing you, but like you're fine, you know? And there was actually one time they put me in this move. It was like, man, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like, kind of like they set you up for the pedigree.
Okay.
But then he lifts you up, and so like you're in like an inverted tombstone, right?
Okay.
And then he just sits down while you're in that inverted tombstone, and then just as he's falling, he kicks you out, and like you land on your face, right?
Wow.
So it's kind of like a face buster, I guess, but
Okay.
like a different version. So he did that to me, and the way that I sold that, my cousin looks at me as soon as I hit the mat. My cousin goes, "Are you good? Are you good?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." Like, I didn't even actually touch the ring. He's like, "Dude, it looked like he broke your neck when he did that." And I said, "No." I said, "I'm good. Like, it's all good." But he, I don't know, my cousin was a believer from that point on. He was like, "Wow, like you can actually sell this shit," you know. So that's kind of how it evolved. You
That
know?
is
and they
great.
Yeah.
Oh,
it
man.
it was wild. They did some stuff that just, I don't know. I had fun.
Yeah.
I had fun. I thought it was fun. But then it kind of ended on a sour note. I mean, like I was telling you, I ended up with a concussion and a broken tailbone, so that was fun. But
was that like during a match or during training, or how did that come about?
We were having a mock match or whatever, and like, so it was me, and they put me up against my cousin because I'd been wrestling him for, you know, however many years, you know.
Yeah.
So they were like, okay, you guys can work together and it'll be safe. You've been doing this forever, you know, that's fine. So they put us up against each other, and he goes to body slam me, and you're supposed to, like, before you slam them, you're supposed to like grab the back of their head and tuck their chin so that when you slam them, they don't get a concussion.
Yeah.
Well, he never grabbed my head and just like threw me like hard. And so I instinctively like almost sat up, and I landed completely bad, and like I like couldn't move for like a solid minute. I was like,
man.
okay, this is bad. Like that wasn't good, you know. And
Yeah.
then I was fine after that, like, but I knew that I messed up my tailbone at that point, and then I took another clothesline in a different practice. That time I was like, all right, whatever, that's my fault, I'll keep doing it, no big deal. Took like a week off and went back at it, no big deal.
Yeah.
And then the second time we were doing a practice, and I took a clothesline, and I landed right on the back of my head, and I saw stars, and I sat in the corner for about 20 minutes.
No.
And then I was like, all right, I'm good. I think I'm good.
Yeah.
Like,
You got your taste. So one thing I was curious to know, and this is a random question. I know, for the listeners, we talked a little bit about what we were going to talk about while you were on today, but I'm going to throw you a random question I didn't talk to you about. So you've been watching wrestling, obviously, at this point, at the time of you going to school, for upwards of probably 15 years, since you were a kid. And I've always had this small theory, and this is not to say that any old schmo could come off the street and be a wrestler, but I've also believed the idea that as fans, and I would put you in this category along with myself and with Corey, that we watch pretty intently. Like, we're not just like, oh my gosh, did you see that match? Oh my gosh, he's a bad guy, he's a good guy. Like, we actually watch the technicality of it. And I believe that with that, there's almost this like instinctual nature that comes into us where, like, I'm not saying I could go put on a match, but I'm saying I feel like I could do some basic moves, like just by someone saying, like you said, like, take a bump, right? Do this. Because, like, I've watched enough of what professionals do to, like, kind of know instinctually. Do you feel like, as a person who went to school, like, were there certain things that you kind of could, like, look back on and say, like, yeah, I saw that on TV and I can kind of generally know how to do it before they, like, even showed you? Like, did that kind of have any sense of carryover for you?
Oh yeah, right away, like, they were like, lock up, and I just locked up because I was like, okay, like, I've seen that a million times. That's basic. I'll just lock up, throw him in the corner, and come at him.
Okay.
Like, that's fine. So, like, and like, there's basic moves that you can do, like, when you're taking a DDT, like, you're not the one. Like, if you're giving the DDT, you're not the one that just, like, drops and, like, takes the bump. Like, you wait until the guy that you're giving the DDT to is ready to go, and then he says he's ready to go, and when you tap him on the back, he takes the bump, and you just follow him.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's like stuff like that, like the little intricacies that maybe people, don't see. But, like, there's a lot of moves where, like, especially if you're, like, doing the move, you don't call the bump. Like, the person taking the move bumps, and you just follow through. You know what I mean?
Right. You're more of a support, and that's like, when you were watching, even as a kid, I mean, granted, maybe when you were, like, first watching, it wasn't that way, but, like, as you got older, were you in that place as a fan where you were kind of, like, looking more at how they did the moves and kind of, like, taking note of how, like, they kind of worked in tandem rather than just kind of, like, enjoying the entertainment of it? Because that's how I know, like, Corey and myself are kind of along those lines. Like, we started kind of looking at the technical side of it and the actual, like, production of a match rather than just, like, the winning and the losing and, like, the entertainment side of it.
Oh, 100%. I'm one of those people that, like, if a wrestler comes out with a new move or something and I've never seen it before, I'll rewind it like 5-6 times before I figure out, like, oh, he did this, and that's how he pulls it off. Like, I'm one of those guys.
Yeah.
That does that kind of thing.
Nice.
But there's a lot of moves out there that I know for a fact I could never pull off in a ring ever.
Right.
Like,
right.
It's just how it is. Like, you gotta, when you're in there, you wrestle to your strengths. You know what I mean? And I'm a small dude, so it's like, it's more like you gotta wrestle quick. If you're quick, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a crazy business that we love, man.
Oh yeah, it is. It's a whirlwind for sure. So you did the school thing for a little while, and then the injuries kind of took a toll. But I remember you had told me that you kind of tried your hand at kind of, I guess you could say, like your own like backyard wrestling type stuff. So was that after the wrestling school? Like how long of kind of a gap was it between you doing the school and then like you kind of saying like, hey, I want to go this route? And I mean, I'm sure at the time it was kind of, there was a period of time where backyard wrestling was kind of like the new like it thing, like you had all these people popping up kind of doing stuff on YouTube and doing stuff with little handheld camcorders. Like, is that kind of the level that you were at, and like was that real soon after the wrestling school, or did you kind of take a little hiatus from it?
That was before the wrestling school.
Okay, so this was like as a teenager.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, we all the way probably up until right before the wrestling school, to be quite honest. I mean, it was like every time that it was passable weather and we could get outside, we would do it, and there was about 20 of us, and it was wild. I was pretty much the trainer of the group because I was the only one that knew what they were doing.
Yeah. So you were the booker.
So,
you were the Finley of the group, just booking matches and making things happen.
Pretty much, man. Pretty much, and
nice.
Of course, when you're wrestling somebody, even if it's backyard, and I know a lot of people frown upon backyard wrestling and whatever, and that's fine. I mean, I understand that backyard wrestlers aren't professional wrestlers. I get that,
right.
But like at the same time, like when we did it, like we, had a sense of let's not hurt each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it was that kind of deal. We weren't like smashing light tubes over each other and whatever.
Right. Some of them get pretty intense with what they try to pull off and do. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was kind of that mentality, the same as what real pro wrestlers have. Like, if you mess up and you're in the ring with me, I'm going to give you a receipt for your mistake. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I remember a story comes to mind. This is a wild one. We were having the only hardcore match we ever had in our backyard wrestling federation, or whatever you want to call it.
What did you call it? Did you have a name for it?
We called it Extreme Trampoline Wrestling is what we called it.
Nice. ETW.
Yeah.
ETW. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. So, but we were having a hardcore match, and it was against one of my buddies, and I said to him, like, okay, we're using real weapons, like real chairs, real, sledgehammers and trash cans and trash can lids. We had the whole gamut of weapons, anything you could think of. And I told him, like, okay, these weapons are real, but if you hurt me, you're going to get a receipt, because he wasn't that good. And so I didn't really trust him going into it.
Yeah.
And so we're like midway through the match, and he hits me with a broomstick, but he hits me like in a way that like almost snaps the broomstick, and I thought he broke my arm, right?
Wow.
So like right away I'm like, okay, that's not cool.
Yeah.
So I picked up a metal trash can lid, and I wrapped it around his head. And I like literally like I wrapped it around his head, and it cut him wide open. And
there you go.
I said to him, do you want to end the match now? And he goes, yeah, I think we better. And then we hurried up and ended it. But he ended up getting a stitch or two from that. Hey. But I didn't mean to hit him as hard as I did, but
hey,
frustration is a crazy thing.
You ain't the first to give a stiff shot or two, and you sure as heck won't be the last. That's for sure. I know that's like commonplace for like Randy Orton matches. I think you're in good shape. So, I mean, that's awesome, dude. Like the hearing those types of stories and having those experiences. I mean, that's to kind of like, I don't want to say live the dream, because obviously I'm sure you'd love to be, if you had it to do it over, being a professional would be amazing. But, to kind of like live the dream in some sense and like kind of play out a little bit of like what you grew up, idolizing has got to be a pretty like surreal thing when you kind of go back and think about it.
Oh, it's cool. Yeah, it was a ring in the middle of a field and whatever, and no big deal, but, like, that was still cool. Like, those guys that I wrestled with were legitimate professional wrestlers that actually, like, do it for a living, on the independent scene and stuff, and, like, so that was cool. And the one guy actually was trained at, have you ever heard of WXW before?
I vaguely have, yeah.
It's run by the Wild Samoans. He was trained by the Wild Samoans, and he was my main trainer down there when I was down at that wrestling school.
So he's definitely taking a few stiff shots if he's being trained by the Wild Samoans. Are we talking like Afa and Sika, like those guys?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh! Mm-hmm. Ironically, I have their autograph. Speaking of connection to your podcast, I have an autograph from the two of them. That's crazy.
Cool.
I bought it out of a special pack of something. Yeah, it's crazy. Wow, those are two. I mean, that's two legends right there. So I mean, that's crazy. So I take it. I mean, I know we've talked a little bit, so I kind of already know this answer. But would you say that you're still? I mean, for our listeners, like you're still an avid fan. Now that the kind of the school days are behind you and the independent, kind of backyard stuff's behind you. Like you're still an avid watcher of wrestling, correct?
Oh yeah, every week as much as I can. I mean, a lot of times, to be honest, I miss Monday Night Raw and I miss SmackDown, but I catch AEW every week.
So what's exciting you in the wrestling world these days? Like as you look as a fan, and whether it's AEW or somebody specific in AEW or maybe something else you're noticing, in WWE, like what's been kind of getting you excited recently as a current wrestling fan? Because I know Corey and I have kind of talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly lately, but we always kind of love hearing other people's opinions.
I mean, I've always been a fan of the matches that tell a story within the ring that you don't have to have a background to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like classic example would be Cody Rhodes versus Dustin Rhodes at the first AEW pay-per-view, I believe it was.
Yeah.
That told a story without even a story.
Right. Right.
Those are the kind of matches that I look for now. If you can tell a story inside the ring without me having any background knowledge, even if I'm a casual fan just flipping through the channels and I see that and I can be involved in the story, that's good. So that's kind of what I look for. If you can get me emotionally invested into the match by telling a story without a promo package or whatever, that's good.
Right. So, and one thing I know, a big credit, I think, to AEW early on, especially with their pay-per-views, is they weren't relying on weekly television before their first couple of pay-per-views to tell that backstory, and so that's a huge kudos to guys like that. And especially Dustin Rhodes, a.k.a. Dustin Reynolds, a.k.a. Gold Dust, a.k.a. a million other things. That man is, I think, one of the best workers that I can remember in a long time, and being at his age and still being able to do what he does at such a high level, and I remember watching, I didn't watch all the pay-per-views before they came to TNT, but that was a match that I watched, and you're absolutely right. Like there was a story told there. And what was so impressive about it is they, outside of maybe some online like Instagram posts and stuff reminding people of those matches, there wasn't a build, just because they didn't have the weekly TV to rely on. And that was impressive to me that they could still have that magnitude of like emotion and drama and suspense in that match without having any sense of a build, which obviously WWE relies on heavily.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, WWE runs all kinds of promos and video packages and whatever, but and that's fine. I'm not against that. It's just like I think as a fan, it does more for us if you don't really have to tell that story in a 20-minute boring promo. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's just me. I don't know. I'm not saying I'm completely right, but I think there's a lot of fans out there that like that kind of thing. Because nobody likes sitting through a 20-minute Seth Rollins promo, let's be honest.
No, I want to go to him here for a second, because he's a guy that I do look at that I think has almost had too much time on the microphone sometimes. Do you think fans are kind of starting to like, and I use this term slightly sarcastically, like, do you think fans are kind of starting to like Roman Reigns him a little bit and kind of getting a little like burnt out, to use a horrible pun, get burnt out on like just him being like so oversaturated in terms of like TV time and like promo time and all this stuff?
Well, I think that happens with a lot of different guys. I mean, if you look back in history, if you look at, Hogan and Cena and Roman, and now Seth has taken on that role. Like there's always, for each generation, there's always one guy that WWE just puts all the chips in and says, you know what, we're going to force this guy down their throat whether they like it or not. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's kind of what they're doing with Seth now, which is unfortunate because, and not that Seth is a bad wrestler, because I think he's a really good wrestler, but I don't think he has the character to be compelling. You know what I mean? Like, he bores me, to be honest.
Yeah. I almost feel like, and I mean, it wasn't even, I guess, much of a character in of itself too, but like the authority version of him, when he was like running with like Triple H and Stephanie and Randy Orton and kind of had that like faction around him. I almost feel like that was the best like character version of him,
Oh yeah. 100%. I do think that that's a valid assessment there. I mean, I don't know. He can wrestle, but like even when I watch him wrestle, it's kind of like he's just trying to like get his shit in and go home. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's hard with the competition sometimes. Sometimes I do wonder if he's like playing down to his level, because I do think he's skilled. And like I think back, and I don't know if you've caught it or not, but on Raw, he had a match with Humberto Carrillo, who's like a new draft pick who used to be on 205 Live and all that. And I felt like because Humberto's a little smaller, a little faster, a little more athletic, Seth was able to show off a little bit more of his stuff too. Not a ton. He still was a little kind of flat to me, but I wonder if he just works better with like a smaller, faster type, and I feel like lately it's been Brock, it's been Braun, it's been Bray, it's been all these like big guys, and I don't know if that's the right like match for him in terms of like like you mentioned earlier, right? Like playing to a wrestler's strengths. I don't know if those types of guys play to his strengths at all.
And I think that you might have a valid point there, because if you really look back at like before he was Seth Rollins or whatever, if you want to go back in time when he was Tyler Black in ROH and stuff, he had some crazy matches. You know what I mean? Like they were good. And then all of a sudden it's like, and I think that's also on WWE's end where like they're like, okay, you can't do this stuff anymore because it's too risky or whatever. Yep,
I know. That's a really big, really valid point, is like that whole, you always hear that wrestling the WWE way, like they take these guys that are known for all these really big moves and these cool spots, and they kind of like water it down so it's a little bit more like TV friendly. And I think that's hurt guys like him a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think it hurts the whole entire product, because if I'm a fan, I want to see that risky stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to see him do a suicide dive outside the ring and hit the barricade or whatever the case may be.
Right.
But, like, that's just me, and that's not everybody's cup of tea, but, and I don't want anybody to get injured or anything like that, but,
right.
like, just a little bit of risk is fun in wrestling. It gets you, as a fan, it makes you invest in the product. I think.
Right. I agree with you there, and I think they could find a happy medium. I'm not necessarily saying we need to go back to like the Attitude Era where there was like chairs and thumbtacks and things being used almost like on a regular basis, but like you said, like even just like some more risky spots on the outside, some risky spots, in the crowd, things like that. Like I think of like there was one recently, but I think back more to like Kofi back like early 2000s, like when he was initially feuding with Randy Orton, like kind of dropping from like the production side, like onto like a table, or like there's been a couple times where guys like Jeff Hardy and stuff have climbed the Titantron, like if the person's comfortable if the person catching that person or kind of absorbing the blow is comfortable doing it and they both feel like they can pull it off safely, I don't necessarily see the problem in it.
I agree. And another thing is like with their advancement in the stunts that they do, like now when Shane jumps off the cell, I mean, he hits a crash pad, he's fine. You know what I mean?
Right.
Did Mick Foley hit a crash pad when The Undertaker threw him off the cell? I don't think so. You know what I mean?
Right.
But like, it's a little bit of a different ball game now. They can actually do things that look risky, but still have the safety of the performers in mind, which is good.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But I bet you Mick Foley is watching these things with a little bit of a grin nowadays.
Right. Wishing that he had the opportunity to have some of the safety measures in place now, for sure. What is one thing that I'm going to have you kind of play like pretend president here for a minute. If you could walk into like WWE right now and kind of like try to quickly change one thing that you think could like really improve the product, because we've been talking on our show a lot lately about the Wednesday night war, right? And right now AEW is winning, right? SmackDown's ratings are down. Raw kind of seems to fluctuate. NXT is solid for the time slot and the station, but still it's being beaten out by AEW. What do you think is something that could be maybe done quickly? And I use that term loosely because obviously nothing can be done quickly, but like where would you start, right? Like if you could really try to do something to like try to get WWE back on the right track and kind of feel a little bit more competitive, what would be something you'd want to kind of implement quickly to like get that process moving?
Well, me and you kind of had a conversation about this the other night, and we were talking about storyline continuity and how like storylines have to make sense. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the monster Bray Wyatt shouldn't be buried under a toolbox and then protected by the referee.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Because he's a monster. You know?
Yeah.
So and I mean that's how it goes. I mean, that's what WWE does. But if I could just really look at their storylines from an unbiased, viewpoint and be like, okay, what actually makes sense for this storyline? Because a lot of their storylines seem to just kind of go everywhere and then just kind of fade off, or the payoff is terrible. Like the whole Roman Reigns, Daniel Bryan, whatever, Rowan storyline. I mean, that was trash.
Yep.
So, like, that's the thing. If you're going to do a storyline, you have to make it exciting and you have to make it make sense, because then the fans think you're insulting their intelligence if it doesn't make sense.
Right.
So you just have to look at things and, what makes sense? What do we accomplish by, doing this particular spot? Who do we get over? And that you just kind of have to look at it that way, and that's the first thing that I would do if I had the opportunity to do so, which, that'd be great, but...
Right. Poor old Vince. Gotta get it figured out. Gotta get the right... Well, he has the right team, sadly. He just doesn't utilize them. You gotta really admit... I mean, and I know we've talked about this a little bit, just even on our own side conversations. There's definitely some frustration in the sense that, Vince really does have... If you look at the people he has like working for him, I mean, he's got Triple H, he's got Shawn Michaels, who's down in NXT now, Matt Bloom, who I would say for all intents and purposes is doing a phenomenal job as the head NXT guy, William Regal, Road Dogg. You have tons of ex-wrestlers, backstage as agents. You have Bruce Pritchard. You have Paul Heyman. So you really can't argue that he's like short on wrestling minds. He just does not seem to use them at all.
It's because I think that he doesn't really know how.
Yeah.
Kind of, anyway. He doesn't, because if he uses one of them, like if he, let's say Paul Heyman comes to him and says, "Hey Vince, I have this great idea, let's do it." If he takes that idea and does it the way that Paul Heyman says to do it, then the internet's going to explode and be like, "Oh, that was Paul Heyman's idea and Vince had nothing to do with it." And then everyone's going to look at it and be like, "Oh, what's Vince doing?"
Right.
And he doesn't want that, so he wants his hand in every little thing, He wants the final say is what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's sad, and again, we've mentioned this before. It's sad that his ego has kind of gotten in the way of keeping his product at the forefront. It's still a global giant. Like, we can't ignore that, and I think we would all agree that like WWE is still successful. I mean, they're making millions upon millions of dollars in Saudi Arabia. They're traveling the globe all the time. Like, it's not like they're hurting. But I think we also, as fans that have watched this for so long, I think have seen what it was and now what it is, and just wish we could see a little bit more of the past in terms of that risk and that success and that kind of like all-in mentality,
And I mean, really think about like the timeless characters that Vince McMahon has created. You have The Undertaker, you have Kane, you have The Rock, you have Stone Cold Steve Austin. People want timeless characters, and right now there's not one single timeless character on their roster, really, because all the old guys are gone. You can make an argument for John Cena if you really wanted, but he's gone.
Right.
So there's not really those characters that you can really look back on and be like, "Oh my God, do you remember that time that WWE had, these four amazing, crazy character wrestlers?" Because they don't develop characters anymore in WWE. It's just like, "Oh, here's a big guy that wears a bulletproof vest and comes to the ring and beats people up."
Yeah. And the sad, I think that's where a lot of like, and I'm kind of speaking on behalf of both of us, because I would think you would agree with me after our conversations, but that's where I think some of the frustration with Bray Wyatt is, in terms of frustration towards WWE, because here's the first kind of like really viable character. And I would say even his first incarnation, like when he came out of NXT and was like in the rocking chair and like kind of had that Bayou like voodoo type thing to him, like, it was a viable character, and I think a lot of people were sparked by that. Like, ooh, he did it again, damn it. Like, he created another Undertaker. He created another Hulk Hogan. Like, he's flipping done it again. And he just, like, shit the bed with him over and over and over again.
Yep, and I think you hit the nail right on the head there. That's the problem. People want that timeless character, especially with Bray Wyatt, and I've called Bray Wyatt the next Undertaker numerous times, and every time I think he's there, Vince just pulls it right back down. Pulls the plug out of the socket for Bray.
Yep. And I know we were talking on your podcast recently when I was on that we're both very intrigued for Crown Jewel, because now they have this whole false count anywhere, can't be stopped for anything, and we both think that's kind of booked him into a bad corner, because they either do unreversible damage to Bray Wyatt's character by having him lose again, or you just drafted a guy to SmackDown that's now going to be the Universal Champion, which, unless you're going to pull this stupid switcheroo where where Cain Velasquez wins the heavyweight title and then stays on, you're going to have to kind of, again, insult our intelligence by saying, okay, this really bright red title that's like exclusive to Raw? Yeah, that's on SmackDown now. And now this other one's now on Raw again. So, just, sucks for you. They got to do something like that. And I think it's going to piss people off either way.
And I was really thinking about that since we've talked, and my viewpoint on it is the only way that they get themselves out of it is to have some huge surprise at the end of Crown Jewel to send the fans home happy, whether it be a returning somebody or something to send the fans home happy. And that's really really what I think they have to do is pull some crazy thing that nobody will see coming to, like, even if it causes Bray Wyatt to lose, if it's a big enough thing, people will forgive. So,
yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think they need to, like, pull something out of the hat and just, I don't know what it could possibly be, but, you know, if they do something big enough, people will forgive. So they either have to advance the storyline so far as to, like, for example, let's say, this is just hypothetical, there's no basis behind this or whatever.
There you go. Roll with it. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's just say that, like, Liv Morgan comes out as Abby the Witch, right? And she comes out as Abby the Witch, and then, like, somebody else comes out as the Huskus the Pig with the creepy pig mask on or whatever. And then you have Ramblin' Rabbit, but I wouldn't use him as an actual character. And then you have, who's the other one?
Mercy the Buzzard.
Yeah, so I would use somebody as Mercy the Buzzard. Maybe an Edge, because he's an opportunist, and that's what buzzards are.
Hey, wow, nice connection.
So, I mean, let's just say, hypothetically, they bring out Liv Morgan dressed as Abby the Witch or whatever they want to do with some supernatural powers or something, and then they have Edge, and then they have, like, let's say, Braun Strowman as the pig, right? So people would buy into that, like, and that would get them out of the whole situation, because people would be happy that they formed this new stable. You know what I mean?
I mean, and I've never minded factions. I feel like WWE's so quick to form one and then, like, break it up. You know, like the New Day and the Shield, I feel like are the only ones they've had with some longevity in the last, like, half decade or so. And then I wouldn't mind a really solid stable kind of running roughshod over a brand for a little while. It wouldn't bother me in the slightest.
And I think that's really their only way out, to be quite honest, because if they pull that off, but I mean, they won't. Let's be honest, they won't. They don't have that foresight. But to dream about that is, right. You know, as a fan, that'd be cool.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. Well, hey, I mean, just that. I mean, I know you said there's no basis to what you're saying, but just the thought of that potentially happening makes me a little bit more intrigued to watch Crown Jewel now, just to see, hey, could Vince McMahon pull an ultimate rabbit out of his hat and pull that off? It'd be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, because then those guys could kind of, you know, maybe the Fiend just straight up disappears at Crown Jewel. Maybe those three people that I named come out, and Liv Morgan does some weird Undertaker stuff, and the Fiend disappears, and that's how it goes off the air.
Wow. Hey, hot take here, folks. You heard it first. Hot take.
Yeah, because, I mean, then everybody's happy, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
That's what I would do, because then you're going to get the buzz of people like, oh, Bray disappeared. Does he have the belt? Is he, you know, nobody will know. Right.
Man, I love it. That's all great stuff. And definitely, you know, hopefully we'll be able to, you know, maybe connect again after Crown Jewel and see where we all stand with our thoughts and feelings around whatever it is that's going to happen. So
it'll definitely be wild if I know WWE. They'll do something that we'll either really hate or really love.
Yep, it's pretty much been that way lately. It's either like okay, I dug that, or you are the biggest idiot on the planet, Vince McMahon. What are you doing? So. I mean, it's kind of a 50-50 toss-up. So, again, we're getting ready to wrap up here. But Anthony, I cannot thank you enough again for coming on today, having some fun, talking wrestling, talking some fun theories. That frickin' Firefly Funhouse into reality is a really cool theory. I know you've kind of teased that to me a few times, like in messages we've exchanged with each other. And so it's kind of cool to like hear some potential thoughts play out. And I forget about Liv Morgan because she's been off TV for so long. So again, it's something that makes sense, right? Like if she comes back that way, it one puts her in a huge spotlight quickly, and it's not, it's not out of the blue, right? Because she's been gone for so long, where this transformation makes sense. It's not like we just saw her a week ago and then this next week, she's different,
Let's be honest, she's the only diva on the roster that could pull it off. I mean, really.
Yeah, I mean, she has that kind of like, her persona is not crazy, but like she has that look. You know what I mean? Like you put some dark hair on her and stuff, and she could definitely pull off that look. That's for sure.
Yep. So. And I mean, I don't know if it'll happen at Crown Jewel, but I think it is. Whether they form the whole stable, I think her showing up with Bray is coming in the future. I just don't know when.
Yeah.
But
I'll be on the lookout for that. That's for sure. But again, man, we thank you so much for being a guest on tonight and kind of helping out on short notice. I know I kind of got in touch with you about half an hour before I was getting ready to record when my good buddy Corey said he couldn't make it this week. So I appreciate you so much filling in. And again, please make sure take some time here before we send you off. Remind all our listeners where they can kind of get access to you and all your content.
Well, absolutely, and I appreciate you having me on. And like I said, we have the Autograph Cave Facebook page you guys can check out. And we also have the Autograph Cave on YouTube, which we upload our weekly podcast to. That's the Behind the Autograph podcast. And we talk all kinds of, autograph collecting related things. And just sometimes it's not even autograph related, like this last episode, which should be up tomorrow, that I just did with Brent here. We talked a lot of wrestling,
Yes,
so
we did.
It all depends. It's a wide open podcast, and it's a fun listen, and it's certainly fun to do. So you could definitely check all that out, and I look forward to the group growing and us all helping each other, and that's kind of why I created the Autograph Cave in the first place, is to kind of have a community where everybody could kind of help each other, because I felt that autographs in general was like a big, like, guarded secret almost,
Yeah.
Nobody told anybody where their info came from or anything, and I just kind of want to break that barrier, like it's time. It's 2019. We have all this technology. Let's help each other out and get some good autographs and, have some fun along the way,
Yeah, for sure. It definitely has that, for a while, had that like underground society type thing. I know Corey always kind of cracks up when he hears about my autograph stories. He's like, how do you like do all this? He's like, this feels so like secretive. I'm like, it is to some people. So it's nice and refreshing to have people around that world that are actually like giving and actually like want people to be in the know, and doesn't just kind of like hoard the information for themselves.
Yep, for sure. And like I said, I appreciate you having me on, man. And, I hope that soon we can do it again with Corey, and we can all, talk wrestling or whatever you guys want to talk about. It'll be a good time.
Heck yeah, man. Well, we appreciate you as always, and we will be in touch, and you take care of yourself, all right?
All right, thanks, bud.
Right, take care, man.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Alrighty, that was our wonderful guest for this evening, Anthony from the Autograph Cave. Big shout out to him for helping out and taking care of me when my buddy Corey was down and out this week. Corey's working hard on some job-related stuff, so big shout out to Anthony for helping us out there. And that's gonna wrap it up for today. Again, please don't forget to check us out on all our various social media accounts. I know sometimes I can get a little overbearing on those, but I appreciate all the responses, the tweets, the retweets, the likes, and all that. So check us out on Instagram and Twitter at CheapPopsWP. Feel free to send us a email anytime you might have questions or suggestions about the show at cheappopswrestlingpodcast@gmail.com, and check us out on YouTube at Cheap Pops Wrestling Podcast. subscribe, hit that notification button, give us a thumbs up, leave us some comments, and also check out our brand new Facebook page by searching Cheap Pops Wrestling Podcast. So from my absent buddy Corey, I am Brent. Thank you again for listening as always, and we will see you next time.